My name is Melissa Reynolds, and I live in a peaceful suburb just outside Portland, Oregon. For many years, I wore the masks expected of me. The faithful wife, the nurturing mother, the woman who kept the household running smoothly. To outsiders, we were the definition of a happy family. There was me, my husband Daniel, and our teenage son Ethan. We had a comfortable house, friendly neighbors, and the kind of picture-perfect life people admired. But the truth behind that neat facade was far more complicated. Cracks had been forming in our marriage, slow and painful like water seeping into stone. Daniel and I had been married for over 16 years. In the beginning, he was full of charm, witty, driven, effortlessly magnetic. People were drawn to him, and I was no exception. But over time, something in him changed. Maybe it was the stress of work, or maybe our paths had drifted so far apart that neither of us noticed until the silence set in. He became distant, emotionally unavailable. What started as short, tense conversations turned into cold stares and closed doors. But the most painful part wasn't what he said, it was what he stopped saying. The absence of connection, the quiet resentment, that was what truly hurt. Then one evening the truth became undeniable. I was folding laundry in the living room when he came home later than usual. His tie was askew, his shirt wrinkled, and he reeked of a cologne I didn't wear. My heart understood what my mind didn't want to admit. He tried to walk past me as if nothing were wrong, but I stood up and asked the question that had haunted my every sleepless night. Is there someone else? He didn't answer. That silence hit harder than any confession ever could. I don't recall screaming or crying. I just stood there, staring at a man I no longer recognized, and told him to go. He pushed back, tried to manipulate the moment, made vague excuses and rewrote reality in real time. But I had spent too many nights alone with my doubts. I refused to spend another one that way. When the door finally shut behind him, the stillness in the house was heavier than I'd ever known. Ethan was away on a school trip that weekend. He was 16 then, tall for his age, with Daniel's strong jawline but his own gentle spirit. When he returned 2 days later, he found me at the kitchen table, my eyes red from crying, a half-finished cup of tea cooling in front of me. "Where's Dad?" he asked as he set his backpack down. I didn't want to force him into loyalty. I didn't want to make him a casualty of our adult failures. So I told him the truth simply. I asked him to leave. Ethan stood there uncertain. I expected tears, maybe even anger. Instead, he quietly crossed the room and wrapped his arms around me. No words. Just that steady, silent embrace that said more than anything. I see you. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. The days that followed were brutal. I couldn't sleep. I barely touched my food. I kept myself busy with errands, paperwork, cleaning, anything to avoid facing the emptiness of the house. Daniel didn't call, and I didn't want him to. Every now and then, I'd lie awake wondering if I had done the right thing. The silence was suffocating, and the loneliness even worse. But Ethan, he quietly became my anchor. He didn't ask me every day if I was okay, but he showed me in subtle ways that he cared. He started handling chores on his own. He'd cook dinner, tidy up, even bring in the mail, all without prompting. His actions spoke volumes. He noticed. He understood. One chilly Saturday morning, I sat on the back porch wrapped in an old sweater, gazing at the garden I had planted myself, the one Daniel had always promised to help with but never did. Ethan stepped outside carrying 2 mugs of cocoa. He handed me one and sat beside me. "You did what you had to do," he said quietly. It was the first time I let myself cry in front of him. "I just didn't want you to feel ashamed of me," I whispered through tears. "I didn't want to be the mom who ruined our family." He looked at me with a calm, steady gaze that seemed far too wise for his age. "You didn't ruin anything, Mom. You saved it." From that day on, I stopped dragging guilt behind me like a shadow. The months passed. I went back to working part-time at a small bookstore downtown, a job I had left behind years ago. The familiar scent of paper and ink brought comfort I hadn't realized I missed. I began reconnecting with old friends, volunteering at local events, and even joining a weekend yoga class. Slowly, I began to remember who I was, not just as a mother or a wife, but as Melissa. Ethan started preparing college applications. He'd always had a love for environmental science and dreamed of attending university in Washington. Some evenings, we'd sit at the kitchen table working through applications, editing essays, and laughing about how outrageous tuition had become. What bound us wasn't just shared hardship, it was shared healing. We didn't avoid talking about the past, but we didn't let it define us either. Daniel reached out once, 6 months after the split. He sent an email, a strange mix of half-hearted apology and sentimental nostalgia. I never replied. Not out of hatred, but because I no longer needed explanations. I had moved on, and I had made peace with the idea that some people are meant to be only a few pages in your life story, not the whole novel. One afternoon, while packing away old belongings, I stumbled across a box filled with our memories. Faded photos, love letters, concert tickets from when we were still young and in love. I let myself smile at the good moments, then quietly let the bad ones go. I sealed the box, set it near the door, and felt a gentle sense of closure. That chapter was over. I was ready for what came next. Ethan's graduation was in June. I sat in the crowd, clapping wildly as he crossed the stage. He caught my eye and gave a small, proud wave. I felt an overwhelming surge of joy, not just for his achievement, but for our resilience. We had weathered the storm and come out stronger. That evening, we celebrated with dinner at our favorite diner. Between bites of pancakes and chocolate milkshake, Ethan looked at me and said, "I wouldn't be the person I am if it weren't for you." Chuckled. "You would have turned out great either way." He shook his head. "No, you showed me what strength really looks like. What grace is. You didn't let him break you." I blinked back tears. "I was so afraid you'd blame me." He smiled softly. "That never even crossed my mind." That night, lying in bed, I realized something profound. I wasn't lonely anymore. Real loneliness isn't just about being by yourself. It's about feeling invisible. But Ethan had always seen me. And in his eyes, I had always been enough. Now, a full year later, I sit on that same back porch, watching the garden come alive with sunflowers and daisies. Ethan's away at college, but he calls every Sunday and texts more often than I ever expected. The house is quiet, but it no longer feels empty, it feels peaceful. Breathe. I've picked up painting again, something I hadn't touched in years. I even hosted a small art exhibit at the community center. People came, asked questions, connected over color and canvas. It reminded me that life isn't about flawless endings. It's about bold new beginnings. Yes, I was alone after Daniel left. But Ethan never judged me. He stood beside me when I was too tired to stand on my own. And because of him, I found my strength again. Found myself.